So, hello and welcome back to the Science of Teaching Movement podcast with myself, Lincoln Blandford. In this episode, we get to catch up with the guys from Shapesmith and a female athlete working with the team there, and one that's also breaking world records in the pool. Today's topic then is the female performance course. We get to hear about what that is, why it's needed, and also why it's needed now. We get to hear about the evidence base that's supporting the particular course, and also why they've chosen to start with the menstrual cycle. They also help us understand why this is a key topic to appreciate when working with the female performer. We do get to hear the female athlete's experiences and also views on why we need this type of education. So I hope you gain insights from this particular podcast, and I hope you enjoy. So one of the themes, the theme for this evening is talking about the female performance course. Matt, I'm going to start with you, mate, because, well, Shapesmith.
Why not? Thank you very much for having us. So I'm Dr. Matt Hancock, or Matt for the remainder of the podcast. I'm a sports scientist. I've worked in a range of sports, sort of starting out in football and then working with England rugby whilst I did my PhD, which is largely focusing on injury prevention and performance analysis, and then worked as a researcher, primarily in combat sports, and I'm currently kind of double hatting as the Human Performance Innovation Lead for the British Army, and also the Managing Director of Shapesmith, which is essentially a company that looks to provide human performance services, a range of human performance services to athletes in one place. And we've got a real particular interest in female health and female performance, which is why we're here. So thanks.
I'm happy to go next if you like. Yeah. So my name's Jack. I'm by trade, I think I'm sort of a practitioner within sport and exercise science. So predominantly strength and conditioning background. Joined on to the Shapesmith performance team in the last year or so. And I'm essentially the Shapesmith Performance Fellow. So I help lead on the design and structure of our educational course content, with the big focus, of course, what this gathering today is sort of shaped around. So my sort of background extends predominantly within S&C, strength and conditioning, with predominantly rugby. That was my background, playing high performance rugby, and then stepped into coaching practice when I sort of realized I wasn't going to go any further with it, but then wanted to stay involved with the sport. So predominantly was involved with rugby, but have sort of extended into other sports as well, swimming, athletics, netball, but my sort of real passion, my real love has been based around rugby union, and in more recent years have stepped into academia, so into a lecturing role at higher education, and obviously gives us the opportunity to step into some research and do some investigation. So not quite the level of sort of PhD, Mr. Hancock here, but yeah, looking to get some work out there and extend the field a little bit.
Nice one, Jack. Thank you very much. All right, Rebecca.
Yeah, that leaves me. I'm Rebecca Guy. I guess I'm here in the capacity of an athlete today. So I've worked with Matt over the past season. I'm a swimmer. I kind of straddle two worlds in that I compete at a master's level. So master's is kind of amateur, 25 and over. And I have multiple world records and European records, the most recent being just a few weeks ago. In the sprint events, so I'm a 50-meter freestyle swimmer and 50-meter butterflyer. But I also got silver at the GB British Championships in April, which is the sort of main domestic meet of the British swimming calendar, or now known as Aquatics GB. And that's competing, against everyone. So professionals and non-professionals alike. So I'm currently sort of ranked second in GB, but at the ripe age of 32, bringing wisdom to the very young final that was there in April in 2025. So yeah, I'm very much here to bring the voice of someone who's doing the thing we're talking about, and training
Perfect.
and navigating that. Yeah.
Well, and also doing fantastic things in terms of performance. Congratulations on world records of any sort is no mean feat. So fantastic. We will then dive into a little bit of the meaty stuff around this particular topic.
If I start us off, and maybe Jack can give you the meat on it. Essentially, we were looking at designing a modular educational resource, really to improve the understanding of both female athletes and anyone working with female athletes. And it really should cover and kind of span all ages, all training levels, all life stages. And when we started designing the course, we really wanted to make sure that it was as accessible as possible, as quite often this sort of educational content isn't. It's not bite size, it doesn't cover a wide array of topics, and so when we sat down to design the course, we had all of that in mind. Maybe Jack, you could give a bit of the specifics if you're happy to.
Yeah, absolutely. So when Matt and myself sat down and spoke about this number of months ago, we wanted to sort of understand what the sort of key relevant topics were going to be that we want to sort of shape around this female performance course. And some of the sort of content that we kind of discussed and sort of agreed upon was predominantly kind of three strands: our female physiology, training application, and injury and illness. And within that, having a series of different strands that, as sort of Matt says, that modular sort of approach. Similar to kind of a university setting, having different modules where you'd explore different specific topics surrounding that broader, sort of wider topic. But the way we've kind of shaped it is trying to have a sort of a blend between something that is credible but is actionable in terms of how we might get that information out there. So in terms of the design of our modules, we have quite a flexible approach. And not necessarily too bite-sized, but that sort of 30 to 60 minutes, allowing access for real learning to take place. But those are kind of our focus. Coming back to the sort of the key question there, those were the key topics that we're really sort of stepping into. So again, as our sort of some of our sort of example modules within each, if you have female physiology, it's looking at menopause, the menstrual cycle. If we're looking at training application, looking at strength and power, conditioning for team sports, as well as injury and illness, again, looking at rehabilitation, as well as some of the more common injuries and illnesses as a result of sort of female physiology. What are the more prevalent sort of exposures as a result of female physiology?
I think what's really important is, sorry, Lincoln.
Yeah, you go for it, Matt.
I think what's quite important is that people can take as much or as little as they'd like. If you're a young athlete and you're interested in learning a little bit more about strength and power training, for instance, you should be able to pick that up and get some recognition for having done it and walk away. But similarly, if you're, let's say, a female football academy physio, you should be able to take a selection of modules and sort of build your own development, if you will. So maybe you'd look at team sports conditioning, you might have a look at current research, you might have a look at working with youth athletes, you might have a look at injury prevention, and kind of build that around the area that you're working in.
So I can see with the so one of the points I want to draw here is you've certainly spent the time to back up the information. So there's an evidence base to what you're delivering, rather than just being, here's some stuff that we think, and also we've used, and we've actually found that's useful. But you've come from this other approach, which is actually to supply this is what the science is suggesting we need to do, and then applied that and delivered that within a course that's, you're saying it's quite manageable in terms of durations. It could be quite daunting otherwise.
Definitely. I think quite often, if you push too hard, the message is lost. And if you think that this is designed not only for sports scientists and strength and conditioning coaches who will often have a degree, masters, maybe a PhD, but it's also there for technical coaches to gain a better understanding, and for athletes who could be 14 years old or could be older but not have done a great deal of education. And I think that whilst depth is very, very important, And a solid evidence base is really, really important. Actually, you want to get the key messages out there, and the best way of showing people what they should be doing is making it simple, and making it clear what they should be doing. So really, there should be no ambiguity at the end of any of these modules. I don't know if you want to add anything, Jack.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree. I think the most important thing is sort of keeping people's attention and having sort of realistic expectations of. You can step into the research and go down the rabbit hole all you like, and that is great. That's fantastic. But actually, that can cause confusion. That can cause sort of uncertainty or etc. But I think the way that we wanted to shape it was to have a realistic time frame for the information out there, to demonstrate the understanding while stepping sort of periodically or incrementally, just stepping into research and drawing that information out to generally be able to infer better from. So rather than us kind of just saying what's out there, we're actually picking out some research sort of periodically just to demonstrate this is where the current landscape is, and this is kind of how we can interpret that and use that information.
Okay, so I'm now interested in turning to Becca here, and as a clearly competing at a high level and successfully competing at a high level, your experience of working with coaches, it'd be nice to sort of hear about how maybe you've been as a female athlete. Has that been an advantage? Has that been anything where you've thought, well, that isn't going to work for me in any particular way, or has that been something that's been well managed?
Yeah, I mean, huge question in a way, because I have a lot of experience of working with coaches, but yeah. What I would say in terms of, to get to the nitty gritty of what you're probably going to be covering later in this conversation, is when I was at the sort of height of my swimming career and training full time, I was training with a group of elite athletes, many of whom were female. And I think it was really clear that the vast majority of the squad had some sort of disruption to their period, to their menstrual cycle. And that was a direct result in hindsight of the training that we were doing and managing the load. So, and in my experience, it wasn't taken seriously. It wasn't seen as a red flag. You know, you've got 100%. I would probably say, yeah, I think I'd be confident in saying 100% of the female members of the squad had some kind of cycle disruption. So that was either a completely absent period or a disrupted one. So having much longer gaps between bleeds. And from my understanding, that isn't normal and that doesn't represent a healthy female athlete. Yet I don't think my coach at the time was in a position to understand why that mattered and to be clocking that sort of thing. So, you know, in hindsight, when I look back to that part of my career, like I wasn't really supported to be healthy and to be thriving. Like that would have been a limiting factor to my performance, which is a shame because, you know, we really put ourselves on the line. Fast forward to now, I suppose I have a different approach in that I kind of build my own team. So instead of being within a performance team, I, you know, independently work with Matt to work on S&C and using data to inform my load. I have a swimming coach as well that's kind of helping within more technical aspects. So I suppose I'm just in a position at this stage of my life to kind of pick and choose who I work with. And, you know, are they legit? Are they working from an evidence base? I suppose is an initial non-negotiable. I don't know if either of you want to say anything there around, like, I know that Red S is one of the main things that you're going to be covering, I think, from what I understand. But that, for me, particularly in the swimming world, it's a really demanding sport. You know, it's not just technique, it's a huge amount of like sprinting and endurance, mileage, volume in the pool. Like, I think it's pretty well known that swimming is pretty brutal in that sense. Really high risk of low energy availability. Was I empowered to understand that? No, that feels a shame. I think that limited my performance. Am I empowered now? Yep, and that makes a massive difference. It's actually really crucial. I mean, you know, this stuff matters. Put a lot of time into this. It's our careers, it's our lives. So it's not just like this like little thing. It's actually huge.
For the athlete, the commitment is huge. For the athlete, the commitment is huge. It's what they do. It's not just recreational activity we're describing here for the athlete at this level of performance. So, I mean, just to touch on that a little bit more, because you've given us some vital insight there. Is it the case then that was of the time? Was it because we were talking maybe, I don't know, a decade ago, perhaps? Or is it just a case of the network you now have compared to the network you had then?
I think it was both a time thing. Like, I think there's a lot of papers that were coming out. So I was kind of referring to an era that was around 2012, 2016 kind of era. And from my understanding, like, there's been quite a lot of key papers that came out more around sort of like 2014, but it's not exactly a new concept. Like, yes, we've got the terminology now around RED-S, but stuff like the female athlete triad, it's been like a known thing in research for a lot of time. So that for me speaks to the disconnect between the researcher and the practitioner being the swimming coach. Obviously I can speak to the specific system within swimming and what's required to be a qualified coach, but I think the bottom line is it wasn't monitored, nobody asked, and it just wasn't remotely considered. We're now in a time where there's a lot more activism online. There's a lot more sort of social media chat around these things. So I like to think that, youth athletes coming through are at least going to have an awareness around this. But you still, I think, ideally need an authority figure where you feel safe to like mention this. Like, I would still say that like it's not something that a typical swimming coach is going to directly. I mean, I can't say that. I definitely can't say that because I haven't worked with every swimming coach in the country. I would suspect that many would still feel like it's a difficult topic to broach.
Mm-hmm.
There's maybe some discomfort there. So I don't think it was just like a generational thing. It's like not that long ago. I don't think it's an excuse. The science was there then.
I do think education's massive, and I know you and I have spoken at length about my views on how important it is for an athlete to understand. The reality is, even if you see them for an hour a day, there's still 23 hours a day that they're not with you and they're making their own decisions. And so I think one of the best things you can do, either as a performance coach or a technical coach, is take the time to explain why and build that knowledge. And I think if you start early, it's a lot easier, and you build the bottom of the pyramid nice and wide, and you can build it tall. But actually, if you miss that opportunity, potentially that's a whole chunk of performance gains that's left on the table. That's my view anyway.
Yeah, 100%. And it's not just performance, is it? It's health. Like, there's a massive crossover. Mm-hmm. So we're just doing people such a disservice from a longevity perspective, from a health perspective, and from an agency and empowerment perspective. Like, it's really nice to be able to make your own decisions from an informed position. It's kind of a key tenet to well-being, I would say.
We're seeing the health and performance side of things become now a much more wedded together component of high performance. I mean, one of my sort of points next here was, why is this course needed? But I think we're sort of very nicely getting to that topic here with where we're going now. What else can we add around why this is needed? How else can we underline this? Because I think we've got some great points. Is there anything else we want to add to why this is needed?
I'm happy to start that one off. So there was it was recently reported within the Olympic Committee that in the 2020-21 Olympics, there was in terms of overall participation, there was 49% females participating in terms of that male-female ratio. So that was historically, that's the first time that we've seen that balance between males and females competing at high performance on the sort of the biggest stage. And that's obviously a fantastic step in the right direction in terms of participation. But in terms of kind of where the research is at, in terms of how practitioners have been able to kind of coach female athletes, has predominantly been based on publications or studies, investigations that have been done on male athletes. Now, I predominantly have seen this myself, just from my own sort of research into this is predominantly done in football, where, again, grassroots academy football teams, again, we've seen huge strides with female football, with some regular sort of high profile names now and sort of the commercial deals that are being done. So it's it's a huge step in the right direction. And I've spoken to practitioners at high performance, that sort of high performance practitioners are, they take it seriously, and it's just as much a part of that programming, because it's something to do with the body, and it's happening regularly. That it's great that is being done, but one of the limitations, why is this needed, is that, again, I think we're still trying to bridge that gap between, we know it's prevalent, we know it's important to monitor and try to navigate, a cyclic sort of, internal sort of organic process, that actually we need to start using literature that is bespoke to female athletes, which I just don't think we're seeing enough of. I think we're seeing a lot of research in recent years into the sort of emotional symptomology, or more subjective qualitative research, so looking at sort of opinions, perceptions, behaviors in response to it, but actually using, taking more of a mixed method approach, where maybe we are looking into the more quantitative data collection in terms of how that can be used to infer sort of programming, adaptation, and just, weathering those who are, choosing to undergo that sort of, natural, healthy eumenorrheic menstrual cycle. So I think in terms of trying to rationalize why, we're seeing a huge steps taken in mainstream sport, non-mainstream sport as well, but actually that literature to back up what practitioners are doing to inform coaches, players, spectators, there needs to be an increase on a bridging of that understanding between where we're at and who's listening.
So the inevitable lags between research to practice, from governing bodies to research, the different components that make up organized sports, for either the people competing in it, or the people organizing it, or the people researching it, these lags going on, and all of them have where they're more advanced, and also where they're still sitting behind. Participation, that's great about the Olympics. If we're sort of now getting that close to parity, that's fantastic. I'm thinking about academy football, because again, I have some interest in that myself. I think we're just about getting sort of 20 clubs with female squads for academies compared to 86 for males. So there's still some way to go on that side of things. Okay, so with respect to the education series itself, and I know we've sort of touched on the first module here, and the first module is this menstrual cycle focus for the female performance course. How are we going about the series as a whole? So what does this look like? You've mentioned sort of 3 strands. Give me some more information about this whole process.
Do you want to start, Matt? You can lead the way.
Sounds like a good plan. So Chimera Movement Science and Shapesmith have come together to create the course. And we've mentioned a little bit about how we'd like it to be accessible. So 30 to 60 minutes, you'll gain a certificate at the end of it. So some people that might not matter. You might be an athlete and you might just want the information. To other people, it might just add to your portfolio, which is great. And within each of the course, there's several videos. So each of them will be led by an expert in their field. So for strength and power, for instance, that'll be led by Jack. But we also have a range of other professionals working for Shapesmith who will deliver some of these modules. And at the end of that, there's a whole host of different resources that you'll be given access to, and a small quiz at the end, just to make sure that you've kind of all of the lessons have sunk in, if you will. And I think it's worth mentioning that just because you're female doesn't necessarily mean that you understand the evidence or best practice. And importantly, just because you're female, it doesn't mean you're always going to be coached by females who may have a sort of far better real world understanding of this than a male ever would. And so I think it's quite uncomfortable sometimes for guys to feel that they can discuss these topics. And I think we need to break those barriers down, and we need to start all talking about it, because actually it's the athletes who matter the most. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, Jack.
Yeah, I think just that was a really good bit of context to that sort of question expressed there. So I think as a result of that, some of the the sort of strands, the different sort of strands, I think we agreed and discussed that the information that we wanted to promote and sort of edify, if you like, our sort of audience is those three strands, which are probably the most common topics that you will either come across in an educational setting or the governing bodies that are doing a wonderful job. They are putting the information out there, and they're offering to that audience who are interested in learning about it. But are they truly stepping into that, trying to find that balance between, not too little information, but not too much information. And that's kind of the territory we want to play in with these three strands and the series of different topics within those. So as I say, just some examples of those strands, sort of our female physiology, that some of the sort of primary or kind of what we forecast to be kind of our more popular, sort of more prevalent sort of topics will be the menstrual cycle, menopause, the adolescent female. So actually, yes, a female does go through this sort of cyclic sort of pattern, but actually during those sort of malleable years, those sort of critical years of growth and maturation, actually, for a female, trying to consider both the sort of emotional response to that as well as what is the physical change that's taking place. So those are some of our primary ones for female physiology. For our training application, again, we're thinking strength and power training. We're thinking of conditioning for team sports. We're thinking about the endurance athlete as well. Again, the rise and popularity of both high performance and general population competing in triathlons, Ironmans, and as Rebecca had alluded to, iron is such a key sort of constituent within the body when it comes to menstrual cycle, because of that sort of cyclic sort of shedding of that endometrial wall. In terms of the physiology, we are depleting huge amounts of iron at any given time, and again, iron is so crucial for red blood cell count and in terms of promoting transporting oxygenated blood. So the sort of endurance athlete, again, is its target. It's not just hitting high performance, it's hitting those coaches that are working with grassroots as well as sort of general population that compete in these as well. And then just finally, just with our injury and illness, again, is thinking about rehabilitation. That's one of our key topics. Red S is another key topic, which I think we need to demonstrate our knowledge and understanding on and educate on, as well as some of the more common injuries. So it's typically for female athletes, the ACL rupture and sort of rehabilitation or reconstruction rehabilitation is something we want to sort of educate on as well and demonstrate what that pathway kind of looks like. What is the sort of etiology, pathophysiology to an ACL rupture, and how do we kind of work through that return to play or sort of rehabilitation return to play protocol for a given athlete or exerciser.
Or exerciser, indeed, yes. So that's that very nicely. Actually, the question I'm going to ask now is, why start with this one? Of all the ones you could have chosen, why this one?
I'll lead the way, if you don't mind. I'll lead the way. I think we started with this one, and this actually came down to myself making that decision on which one I wanted to lead on and sort of open up with. I think the menstrual cycle, just because, I think arguably it is quite a, as a couple of others have alluded to, sort of indirectly, it is a taboo sort of topic. I think it still is a taboo sort of topic to talk about and discuss. And I think the most important thing is, before we can kind of step into it and talk about it and be able to kind of build that rapport with a given athlete or exerciser and be able to have that sort of trust and comfort to actually talk about it with your coach or with your sort of your trainer, I think it's important to understand the physiology, the underpinning physiology to what's actually happening. And as we say, males predominantly, particularly in mainstream sports, are still employed by academies, by high performance institutes. If we're just looking at high performance in isolation, it's predominantly, I don't know the sort of the facts and figures per se on all the different sports, but anecdotally, it's predominantly males who are employed as sort of a head coach or a sort of a practitioner. And of course, that is changing, which is great. We're seeing more females, from a sort of S&C background, we're seeing more females stepping into that world, which is fantastic. But be able to build that trust and rapport with a female athlete, to have that discussion, that's really, really key. And it resonated for me personally, because I've seen that over the last 10 years, 15 years, whether it's myself working with female athletes, and sort of, asking that question. How do we ask that question? How do we build that rapport that we can just make it a healthy discussion? It's happening. It can impact in both a positive as well as a negative way on performance and general health. Let's talk about it. So it was sort of one that I was romantic with, and wanted to sort of get out there first personally, because of those reasons, and how we can not just educate female athletes, but actually those people in those positions, who are predominantly at the moment males, coming from sort of earlier generations that probably, naturally are a little bit more uncomfortable to talk about it. Actually, if we understand the underpinning kind of physiology relating to the menstrual cycle, then we can have a little bit more empathy. We can have a little bit more sympathy during those windows of a menstrual cycle, or, pre-menstrual cycle. I think that's what resonated for me about getting this one out there first.
I think it's, I just want to add to that. I think it's a great idea, because I think from the start, you're setting the scene that it's okay. What we need is the education, and it's okay. We don't need to sort of hush this out into the corner of the room and never speak about it, because it's happening and it's going to affect performance. So we need to address this, and we need to be clear, and we need to be able to communicate with our athletes, regardless if we're male or female, as a coach, about how this is affecting performance, because that's what we're trying to change, regardless of the factor we're considering. So I thought it was a great idea. And also, in this conversation, there's three chaps talking with Rebecca about this, and it's sort of okay. It's not a problem for us. And again, I think it was another really good idea to have this early doors and up front as to launch the process. There was some questioning whether it was appropriate even that it should be Jack delivering this course. And that's just, that's one of the sort of the whole point of view we're trying to actually change, that this is completely fine. And having any way that it should be only females talking to females about this is just probably not very helpful. Matt, you're going to add a little bit more.
Maybe no, not. I think Jack's done a great job explaining why. I think it's not right, but there are a lot more males working in sort of strength and conditioning, sports science roles than females, and that's not a good thing necessarily. But I do think it's important that this sort of uncomfortable topic for some individuals is covered early. But I also think it could be a really long time since people have covered this. So, even if it is covered in your degree program or your master's, you could be 1, 2, 5, 10 years removed from having covered it. And depending on the sort of protocols at the club and induction processes, you might not have touched this at all since then, which is certainly not great. And the reality is, I don't think you can talk about any of the other topics without coming back to this. The reality is it will influence strength, endurance, mood, and even injury risk, sort of during the late follicular phase. And so really this was the only place to start, I would say.
Wow. Okay.
But I don't know whether, Beck, you've got a view on whether it's this was the right place to start or not, or whether understanding actually starts to help break down some of the barriers or not.
I mean, I'm sure all of it's important, so I'm not sure I can speak to the order, but what I will say is one of the things that I'd noted down in thinking about this was just think about the female experience in general. And I think the empathy is actually one of the words that I written down. So it was nice to hear you say that, Jack, in that I would hope that if a coach is educated, they're going to be more likely to take a female athlete seriously, because I think it is a common experience for people to feel just a bit dismissed, like kind of just get on with it. And it's like, well, actually, some people experience their cycles really extremely. there's loads of conditions that might affect that if you have like PCOS or endometriosis or something. So I suppose I like to think that, again, education is going to help coaches understand what they're dealing with so they're not dismissive, and the opposite of that is working to be empathetic in their coaching style. And also I think there are times where maybe you've got like a lead coach that's male, that has typically been my experience, and there might be a female in the coaching team that does have a particular interest in this domain, and perhaps they haven't always been taken seriously. That's kind of happened for me. That's not to say that that's a universal experience. I'm really speaking to my own experience here. Again, education is gonna hopefully help with that. Yeah.
All right.
That's what I'd say.
If I'm a coach and my role is to improve performance, I want to know any factor that affects performance, regardless of what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're dealing with physiology, that seems pretty important to me. But also physiology is going to also affect psychology. So why would I leave that out? So I think it's just I think another reason for the course is just that need to change that perspective on the lack of understanding. Becca, I'm going to dive in even deeper on this with you then, as the athlete, as the female athlete. What's your experience of this? So how has it affected performance? So let's sort of dive into that component.
Specifically navigating the menstrual cycle?
Yep.
Well, I think that I just feel different throughout the cycle, and I think tracking my cycle has been really empowering. I think we should always have permission to also regulate our training based on how we feel, but tracking the cycle can help add, I think, a layer of compassion to that as well. Like there are certain days where I often feel just so much worse, and I think that high performance athletes are typically reasonably self-critical, push pretty hard, pretty determined, pretty motivated. So sometimes it's about holding back a little bit, looking after oneself. I think there's been a little bit of nutrition consideration around potentially needing some more calories and more carbohydrates around certain weeks. That's really helpful to know that, if I'm craving something, I'm not just sort of a hysterical female. I actually just have a increased BMR around that time. Yeah, I mean, and then a lot of it is honestly just dealing with the cards that you've been dealt. You can't control when you're going to be competing. I have some competitions where it's like, oh, great. It's like, I always feel really good around day 12, and it's on day 12. And sometimes it's like, I'm going to be racing when I'm due on my period and I feel absolutely rubbish. I can't change that, but I can kind of do all these other things to make that as easy as possible from that perspective, as opposed to just completely ignoring it and being like caught off guard that I maybe needed to pack some extra snacks and have a bit of extra sleep and look after myself emotionally a bit more. Like, it's empowering.
I know instances when female athletes have underperformed because of this, and they know that they have not made the next heat, or they may not made finals because of this. They can attribute it to this in that they've gone, because of this I didn't do as well as I was hoping. And again, would you say that's an experience you've gone through? Is that something that you've gone, I can probably attribute this to this particular scenario where I am in a month?
I think in training, yes, but I actually think that with my competing, I'm pretty good at doing what I need to do on the day.
Okay.
Fortunately, I think that's super individual. I don't experience particularly debilitating symptoms in terms of like pain. So I think that's really individual. And probably also dependent on your sport. What is your sport requiring you to do? Are you an athlete that is required to do like loads of repeat power or endurance or whatever? And I probably don't have the physiological understanding to speak to that, but Matt and Jack probably can. That's probably what the course covers. But I would imagine, depending what your sport will be impacted differently, right?
I think where different sports are at currently is quite interesting to me as well. Obviously, combat sports and the military is sort of my background, and rugby, and hey, Jack has a different background, and same with yourself, Lincoln. But I mean, I certainly feel like people are moving in the right direction, but actually, given that I sort of read a really interesting paper the other day, actually, is sort of saying 50% of female athletes feel like their menstrual cycle has affected their performance in one way or another. I'm actually surprised it's that low. I would have said, especially given what you've told me back, that it would be higher, but only about 15% felt like their coaches had the tools to adjust appropriately. And I do feel like some governing bodies are better at providing education, providing opportunities to female athletes than others. I don't know if you've got any thoughts, Jack.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's real sort of scope of practice, isn't there, to sort of step further into it from a sort of my background in sort of some of the sports I've worked with, predominantly female rugby union, netball, sports that I've stepped into. During the times that this is sort of around. Still am working, but working predominantly with team sports. The sort of psychosocial dynamic between sort of individuals is considerably more complex. That sort of, like we say, that kind of narrative between coach and athlete or coach and exerciser was totally different. Just to come back to Rebecca's point of how it does affect your physiology and therefore affect your performance. It's exactly the same as male or female athlete looking to make an adaptation in terms of those principles of training, progressive overload, in terms of trying to adapt the body. If we are not feeling fresh, if we're not feeling sort of neuromuscularly set and ready to go, are we going to actually adapt or hinder that sort of targeted kind of adaptation that we're looking for? So coming back to that relationship, when I sort of first kind of asked, as an example, when I first asked to start collecting kind of data on just simply if the sort of athletes were currently undergoing their menstrual cycle, or if they were at that sort of during that window where it's going to affect their performance the most, that kind of luteal phase, whether it's going to kind of, as most of the literature suggests, it sort of negatively impacts performance, negatively impacts sort of well-being. Just asking to collect this information, had to go through several strands or several sort of departments to be able to collect that information, because I think there was just simply a misunderstanding as to whether we were allowed to do that, whether it was possible. And when you actually sort of spoke to the athletes, they were encouraged by that. There was a little bit of shock at being asked to sort of speak about that, particularly from a male. My first and foremost sort of responsibility is to look after you as an athlete, but actually this is so personal, it's so individual, that to a professional level, to a healthy level, I wanted to understand that as best as possible and how it impacts them, because there's obviously hundreds of different symptoms that a female can experience with it, and it's very individualized, and as Rebecca said, it's different for every female, sort of the severity of the impact of it, what type of impact it is. So for me, I was really interested in understanding as best as possible what those sort of individual sort of impacts were from one female to the other.
So we've described then the difference between individuals, difference between sports, and I think what would be nice is to dive into a little bit around the other parts of the series, because that would seem to then sort of lead on to, well, if we're sort of exploring physiology, but they're only going to go into more about the training applications. And you've talked about strength and power for the female performer, for the female athlete. What's this going to look like, and will it be any different to what you would do for a male?
Yeah, either way, I'm happy to lead the way. So yeah, the strength and power is an example of one of the other, what I think we're sort of perceiving to be one of the more popular strands. Because I think strength and power training for athletes, particularly in sort of, aerobic and anaerobic sports where sort of speed, strength, evasion is so critical. Strength and power are such key sort of physical sort of qualities that we require in order to be successful in those sports. And strength and power, it is a good question to ask. Does this actually differ between one female to the next? From a female to a male, in terms of our kind of foundational constructs, in terms of how adaptation takes place. It's not actually a huge difference. So, without stepping into too much detail yet, listen up for the presentation. We step into early on building that context about what an adaptation is. What are some of the sort of popularized models and theories to adaptation? How much training is too much? What's the minimum dosage required in terms of making that adaptation? Now, that actually doesn't differ between a male and a female athlete. Ultimately, we are, as practitioners, as S&C coach, sports science, we're chasing adaptations, constructively and in a timely manner, and to peak at appropriate time. But actually, in terms of again, some of those more advanced resistance training methods that are available, again, that's where it starts to maybe get a little bit more nuanced on actually, again, well, yes, we can employ some of these more advanced sort of methods of training, high performance, or those who've got a high training age, been training for many years. These are appropriate methods, but actually during particular windows of maybe a block of training or during a given time of the month, is this going to be an appropriate method or not, as a suboptimal sort of approach? Is there a time of a period of sort of rest and revitalization versus that's a time to attack and chase those sort of gains that we're looking for? So to answer your question there, kind of concluding there, it's some of our sort of former discussions within that sort of education piece is, no, there isn't actually a distinction between male and females, but as we start to become more nuanced to those advanced resistance training methods for strength and power development, then we start to see, okay, well, let's think more contextualized. Let's think of a given situation or a given time of the month where adaptations are going to be more prevalent versus times where actually we need to kind of listen to the body. Now, what we can't go down the rabbit hole of too much is considering, okay, well, we've got for example a major European tournament that might be taking place. For example, I think it's the women's Euros at the moment. They're potentially playing 6-7 games, going deep into a tournament. Every single female is going to, accumulation of fatigue, of performance, particularly if you've got an individual high-profile player that's playing week in, week out. Actually, how are we going to navigate that layer of programming first anyway? And then to add on top of that, we've also, to add on top of that, we, potentially during a menstrual cycle, how is that also going to affect performance going later into a tournament as well? With all the, the kind of different sort of prerequisites we've already discussed early on, it becomes a complex kind of pathway as to how we kind of navigate that. So you can, like I say, we don't, with these kind of courses, we don't necessarily go down the rabbit hole. We do offer that direction and insight into those. So, for example, there's different applications that have been published by sort of Loughborough University, St Mary's University, to sort of name a few as an example, where they're offering sort of insights into those areas as well, to maybe how you can do that. So, yeah, that's kind of how we tried to tick the box of being able to offer that education, that information, but kind of referring to sort of step a little bit further again if you're looking for further knowledge and understanding.
I'm not going to add a great deal more value than Jack did. I think he's described it really nicely. I think quite often, we spent the majority of this podcast talking about highlighting differences, and I think sometimes it's also really important to highlight where there are similarities in the way that you approach males and females, and sometimes principles of training and the way in which you might approach programming, generally speaking, might be quite similar. But I think it's also really important to start tackling some of the subjects that athletes can find a little bit confusing. I'd be interested in Beck's view on this. The reality is different athletes from different sports with different support networks, different levels of funding, have different access to performance professionals. And actually, given how much sport has progressed in the last 10 years or so, it's not surprising if some individuals maybe have a slightly lower training age or have had less exposure to strength and conditioning than others. But I don't know how you feel the sort of stuff that we've been doing over the last year, Beck, has been different to what you've experienced previously. But to me, this is a bit of a subject that might require educating some athletes on, especially.
So was your question, what do I find particularly confusing?
No, it's more, how have you experienced sort of strength and conditioning over the course of your career? And I know some athletes can find it quite confusing, essentially. And so I think it's a really important topic from my perspective, but obviously your perspective is the one that matters most.
Yeah, well, I think to your point you made earlier, like, even if you're seeing an athlete, you said something like, even if you're seeing an athlete for an hour a day, there's 23 hours a day that they're not with you. I guess more typical with an S&C coach is you might see them like an hour a week or an hour a fortnight, an hour a month. So the education piece is so important. I really want to understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, because the reality is that you could design this perfect program on paper, but we are juggling things in life, and so often you need to make a call really fast in the gym. That might be because equipment's not available, or because your schedules change, or you're feeling really crap, whatever. So to be able to understand, like, what is the actual goal of this block? Like, what am I actually trying to do here? What stimulus are we trying to elicit is really important. And I think, like, that's why I think that's been a real benefit of working with you, Matt, is I don't want to be just given like a number of exercises on a piece of paper. I want to know why I'm doing them. Why am I doing them at this point in the season? To elicit what response? And then that empowers me to kind of tweak things if I need to, based on my week. We've also introduced quite a lot of tracking my load, haven't we? So like, to just kind of try and put it on paper and into a spreadsheet, essentially, like where I've had really big weeks, and trying to manage that so that I don't get carried away, basically, to protect myself from myself. It's really tempting when you feel good to just be like, I'm just going to smash it on everything, and then like the next week you can be in like a total hole. So monitoring load has been like a huge thing for me this year. It's really hard. It's an ongoing journey, that one, to manage. I'm not really saying anything specific now. I'm just sort of waffling on about training. I could talk about it for hours.
Well, load's always a tricky one anyway. I mean, even just defining what load is not simple. So
Totally.
Yes, it's quite tricky, that one. We are sort of getting towards the end of this now, and we've covered some fantastic stuff, guys, collectively, guys. So the final thing we haven't mentioned is really the injury and illness so much, and it'd probably be good to sort of dive in that one and give it sort of due in probably another conversation rather than sort of trying to do it justice now. Final thoughts, I think, at this point then. So female performance course, education, evidence-based, and I think we've built a case for why it's needed and also what it's trying to do. So yeah, final thoughts here.
So I think for me, really, whether you are an athlete or whether you work with athletes in any capacity, it doesn't matter whether you're a technical coach or a performance coach. I think it's your duty to educate yourself, because the reality is it's a really complex topic. And so I do believe that is the first step towards sort of breaking down some of those barriers that might be there and unlocking another level of performance and welfare. So that's kind of my final thought, really. What about you, Jack?
I think it's just simple. It's, this is not groundbreaking to hear this. This is being muttered quite sort of regularly amongst coaches. It's even sort of been sort of muttered in the sort of governing bodies, is that fantastically, female sport it's on the rise, and it's we're seeing a huge step forward in terms of professionalism, commerciality of female sports. Female football, female rugby union, cricket. These are becoming great products. The WNBA, great products. High profile names within not just your sort of more traditional sports, solo sports, where it's more just one name. It's teams that are getting recognition now, and there's a natural sort of correspondence to that. There's a natural correlation that, you know, if there's a topic of interest, you know, questions will arise around that. And under this particular umbrella, female sport is starting to see huge steps in terms of participation, in terms of audience and spectators. As a result, we wanted to investigate it more. So I only see it moving forward from first of all, from kind of a research point of view, that will start pushing these barriers, this boundary and the ceiling higher and higher in terms of, you know, how we can support a female, whether that's the kind of emotional, physical responses. How can we help them navigate further? Because we want them. It's, you know, being a professional it's about winning. Being an athlete who's a weekend warrior, you want to be the best that you can be. So how can we help these athletes do that? So there's only going to be a natural curiosity to ask those questions and create funding for that. And that's ultimately what we are trying to do, is offer a platform to demonstrate that education on what is already out there, for then people to then take that further, which is, it's a very exciting time. And this is this sort of project, this performance course could not have come at a more appropriate time for where female sport is across the globe.
All right, and Becca, any final thoughts from your perspective as in the pool, working hard and working with Matt, and also him helping develop out this education with Jack there?
Yeah, I'm excited. The reason I found Matt in the first place is because I attended some of his lectures. So it was through an educational setting. And yeah, the more the merrier with all this, in terms of getting the word out there. I've not seen the course yet, so I haven't given my official seal of approval, but I like to think that I can trust you, that you've written something legit. And I'm excited.
Send it
I'm excited
across.
to see where it goes. And I think it can be really helpful for so many people in different roles. You've talked a lot about people having degrees and masters, but a lot of people working in sport don't have either of those. They have come through the sport, they've got a sport-specific qualification, they don't have that level of education. And who are we doing this for? We're doing it for the athletes. So I think it's exciting times.
Fantastic stuff. So thank you ever so much for your time. And I think by the sounds of it, we'll probably have another conversation. We'll dive deeper into some of those other topics that are going to be involved in the female performance course and part of the series.
It will indeed. But thank you very much for having us. And yeah, it's been a pleasure to chat.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lincoln. Thank you.
Right. Catch you later, everybody. Bye-bye.
Awesome. Right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.